My name's Marion Van Ruden. I'm the Executive Director, Labour Markets and International Education in the Victorian Government Department of Business and Innovation. It's my great pleasure and honour to be chairing this session on skills, knowledge, innovation and demographic dividend, particularly given the eminence of our speakers. I'm sure we all look very much forward to learning from them. We'll move straight into the presentations. Each speaker will be speaking for about 10 minutes. I'll be giving them a warning at about 2 minutes to go, because we're hoping to have 15 minutes remaining for questions and answers at the end. Our speakers are very distinguished. Their full biographies are in the programs, and they have urged me not to give a lot of detail, and I couldn't do it justice in the way that it is in the program anyway. So without any further introduction, I'd like to invite Narendra Jadhav, Member of the Planning Commission of the Government of India, to come and speak to us.
Thank you, Marian. Good afternoon, friends. It's indeed a great pleasure as well as an honor to be here. I want to congratulate Professor Amitabh Mattu and his colleagues for such an excellent organization and getting so many people together here on the subject of a great contemporary relevance. The theme for this session is skills, knowledge, innovation, and the demographic dividend. What I'm going to do is to use my 10 minutes of time to talk about demographic dividend and skill development. My focus is going to be on skill development itself. In the last 2 days, we have been listening to demographic dividend, reference being made to demographic dividend time and again. The average age of India today is only 24 years. By the year 2020, it is going to be about 29 years. And at that point of time, in the year 2020, the average age for United States would be 37, average age for China would be about 38, average age for Western Europe would be about 42, and the average age for Japan would be about 48. Which means that India currently has a tremendous advantage in terms of the age composition. While in India, we used to talk about population as a big problem, not any longer. It is not the size of population that matters, it is the composition, the age composition of population that matters, and that is where India has a tremendous advantage. And there is a talk about reaping this demographic dividend. This is a double-edged weapon in the sense that demographic dividend must be harnessed. If we fail to harness the demographic dividend, this window of opportunity is going to be available to us for next 15 years or thereabout. And we have to harness this demographic dividend because this is an opportunity which comes into life of a nation only once. And that is the opportunity that India has today, and we want to make the best out of it, and therefore we are concentrating on harnessing this demographic dividend. With the full realization that if we do not harness the demographic dividend, it can easily become a demographic nightmare because there would be many more mouths to feed, but not enough hands that can work. And therefore, harnessing this demographic dividend is the highest priority. We have just finished formulating the 12th five-year plan, which runs from the year 2012 to 2017. And in this, education and skill development has been given an overriding priority because harnessing this demographic dividend is very important at the stage at which our country is. And therefore, education and skill development have received the highest possible priority in the 12th five-year plan. Looking at the world at large, by the year 2020, the world will face an acute shortage. The aggregate shortage that is going to be there about the skilled person power is going to be about 47 million persons. And by that year, India would have a surplus of 56 million people. Therefore, India has, in principle, a potential to become a skill capital of the world. That is yet another reason why we need to accord such a high priority for skill development. Until recently, skill development did not receive the priority, and when we talked about skill development, we talked about the shop floor skills. Now we have gone way beyond that, but we realize that we have really a long way to go, and there are major challenges involved. Number of challenges which are involved in harnessing this demographic dividend. First is the low education level. The GER, the gross enrollment ratio in higher education, is very poor. It is much below the world average. While we are trying to jack it up, we still have a long way to go. If you look at the attendance rate, at the primary and middle level, 87% attendance level. Higher education, 57% attendance level. And at higher education, it's only 18%. That means only 1/5 of our boys and girls have access to higher education, which is very, very small as compared to what is there in the world. The level of the dropout rates are also unacceptably high. While they have come down in the last 5 years, we still have a long way to go. Yet another challenge is the low level of vocational training. It is very hard to believe that, but today, in terms of the formal vocational education, only 8% of our youth get formal vocational education, which is incredibly small, especially when you compare not only with the advanced economies, but even compared with some other Asian countries, particularly South Korea. South Korea has a 93% rate, and we have only 8% of our youth having formal vocational education. Again, that shows how far we have to go. The level of in-service training is also incredibly small. In India, it is about 24 to 25%, again, which is very low as compared to China, which has attained a level of 60 to 70%. Japan and Germany, of course, have between 90 to 100%. Again, we have a very long way to go. This also has yet another impediment or challenge is the general poor quality of technical education. Survey after survey have shown that 1 out of 4 engineering graduates in India are employable based on their technical skills, English fluency, teamwork, and presentation skills, which means that only 25% of them are employable. Others are not employable, which means that not only we need to improve the access, but we need to improve the quality of education, particularly technical education, way beyond the level at which it is. So there are many challenges involved in that process. What are we doing about it? There has been a complete shift. There is a paradigm shift in the way government has been looking at higher education and skill development. Metamorphic changes are taking place in the sector of higher education. In fact, during the 11th plan, which was just finished, during the 11th plan, focus was on higher education, education at large, and higher education. And the same process has continued in the 12th five-year plan with additional emphasis on skill development. What are we doing about skill development? There is a coordinated action plan on skill development. There are 3 institutions which are created at the central government level. First is the Prime Minister's National Council on Skill Development. Prime Minister himself chairs that council, and that is supposed to be giving the policy direction, and it's doing a very good job. The second one is National Skill Development Coordination Board. One may wonder why there is a coordination board required. In India, about 17 ministries in the government of India, in the union government, are engaged in skill development, but there is virtually no coordination between them. In fact, turf wars are very common within those different ministries which are engaged in skill development. And therefore, this National Skill Development Coordination Board has been established to build synergy across the various union ministries. And then the third institution that has been created is the National Skill Development Corporation, NSDC, which is a PPP kind of initiative, public-private partnership kind of initiative, which is also engaged in the promoting the skill development. The vision that the Honorable Prime Minister of India has given is to have 500 million people technically trained by the year 2022. No doubt this is enormous, and it's an onerous task. We are working towards it. In the next 5 years, we are going to make a big headway towards achieving that target. The target is extraordinarily ambitious, and the system is being geared up to achieve that target. The effort that is being made is to make the skills systems demand-driven. In addition to the central government, the institutions at the central government level, there are a number of institutions created at the provincial level as well. Every state was requested to have their own state level skill development mission. And I'm happy to report that today, all 28 states and all 7 union territories have their own skill development mission suited to their own province or the area that they're governing. There are many schemes there. I'm not going to go through all of them, but just to mention a few landmarks there. Today we have nearly 10,000 ITIs, that is the Industrial Training Institutes. We have about 1,900 polytechnics, and we have introduced what is called modular employable skills, which are short duration courses, modular courses, and there are about 1,300 of them devised, which are increasingly becoming very, very popular. Now, NSDC, National Skill Development Corporation, is proactively catalyzing creation of a large, high-quality vocational training institutions. And what is important is that NSDC, two things which are very important that NSDC is doing, that is conducting skill gap analysis on district-wise basis. So there are 600 plus districts in India, and for each district, the skill gap planning is being done, and that will form the basis of the overall skill development planning. In addition to that, there are sector skill councils which have come up. Some of them have come up, others are in the process, and they have a representation from industry, from government bodies, industry association, business leaders, and training providers. States also have done remarkably well in terms of so many schemes of their own. Gujarat, Rajasthan, Orissa, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Kerala have done particularly well. And this process is now gaining momentum. Going forward, there is a very important innovation that is being currently done, which is National Vocational Qualification Framework. The country doesn't have, one of the major problems in the skill development system that we have is that there is no horizontal pathway from one course to another, from general education to technical education, nor there is any vertical mobility available, and that creates a major problem. ITI courses are all terminal courses. You do a course and it ends there. There is no way you can go from one side of education to another side. So there is a necessity for having horizontal pathways as well as vertical mobility. Keeping that in mind, like most other countries have done, we wanted to have our own qualification framework. There again, the two major ministries came up with their own plan for a skill framework, skill development framework, and that was the Ministry of Labor came up with what is called National Vocational Qualifications Framework. At the same time, MHRD, the Ministry of Human Resource Development, came up with its own, that was called National Vocational Education Qualification Framework. There's the E sitting in between. What is needed is for a country as large as India, there has to be only one qualification framework. So the Prime Minister had appointed a committee, and I chaired that committee. We presented the report, and now there is one framework, National Skill Qualification Framework, that is going to come up, and that is going to get ready in the next few months. The idea is to allow horizontal mobility, horizontal pathways as well as vertical mobility, and that is going to make a lot of difference in terms of standardization of everything, and also converting the skill system to make it demand and industry driven. And there are many innovations which are taking place. I think the challenge is very, very big, and we are trying to grapple with the challenge to meet that target of skilling 500 million people by the year 2022. And in this process, this is one area, yet another area where Australia and India can work together. In fact, in terms of what Australians have done, in terms of recognizing the prior learning and creating seamless pathways and portability of qualifications from one stream to another with credit transfer is something that we find very interesting, and we are working together with the Australian authorities to come up with a system which will meet the challenge, the big challenge of skilling 500 million people by the year 2022. Thank you very much.
A huge challenge indeed. Thank you very much, Narendra. I would now like to introduce Ramakrishna Ramaswamy, who's the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Hyderabad.
Thank you. Let me start by acknowledging that on one matter there seems to be absolutely no argument. Amitabh, you have not allowed anyone to argue over the fact that this is an excellent meeting ground for a variety of different points of view. What I have to say has been said before, so I will say it again, hopefully slightly differently, and with a slightly different perspective, although there's a lot of overlap, not just with Dr. Jadhav, but also with speakers of other sessions. As many of the AIs, as in argumentative Indians, have pointed out, there seems to be one very important, the most important thing really is, or the most important, three most important things are education, education, and education. And this would seem like it's a very good area for intervention, both nationally and internationally. You'll have heard all the problems that there are in India. There are also some advantages that we do have, and one of them is what I heard recently described as frugal innovation. So I'll have something more to say about innovation in general, but frugal innovation is what in our country is called the Jugaad technology, where you put together an engine and hold it with sticking tape or some stuff like that, and you make things work. Now, there is an important part of this, and that is context. Indians are good at this kind of frugal innovation because our context is a frugal one. The issues of money are very, very important. So, given the fact that education is so important, the Indian tertiary education system, and you've heard numbers before, is a very bleak landscape. For a country of 1.2 billion people, we have only 600 universities, and these are in various shapes and sizes and flavors. They are state universities, there are federal universities or central universities, there are institutions that are deemed to be universities, there are private universities, there are a whole lot of different quality issues and size issues when it comes to that. The bulk of education really happens in our colleges. We have something like 35,000 colleges, and that is where the bulk of the bachelor's degrees and some master's degrees are taught. And this is where we have one of the very, very big challenges. The teachers are of varying quality. The students are of varying ability. They come with extremely different backgrounds, very diverse backgrounds, and diverse interests. And trying to fill the gap is what at least some of the issues that we have talked about are. How do you deal with educating this large number of people through the system? The system is an old one, and as you've heard, along with our politics, with our legal system, along with everything else, we've inherited it. There is some commonality because we have a common shared colonial past, but what Indians have done to our educational system afterwards is also amusing. Educational governance, and I have some experience of it in my present life. The educational governance of education is very, very fragmented. Different subjects, and that is germane to a discussion on skills, are governed by different councils which have different laws and different jurisdictions. So in addition to the University Grants Commission, there is a Committee on Technical Education. There's the Medical Council of India, so all medical degrees go through there. The Indian Nursing Council, which will deal with all the paramedical kinds of things. There's the Dental Council of India, the Bar Council. I mean, there are just any number of, every subject comes under a different ministry sometimes. All agricultural universities come under the rural ministry. So there is no really comprehensive university in India, at least not in recent times, which can integrate research plus a school of medicine, plus an agricultural school, plus a technical school. There is one, which is the Banaras Hindu University, and Delhi University in its, but on one campus, finding all this together is very, very difficult. So, this fragmented educational governance is an issue for us. The anticipated number of people that we have to educate is very, very large. And I'm head of one of the it's one of the more prominent universities in India, but I know that it's impossible to cope with even contemplating such large numbers, mostly because our infrastructure is really bad. In the last plan, as Dr. Jadhav pointed out, there was a big ramp up of education. They asked us all to increase our class sizes by 50%. Many, many institutions are struggling because classrooms are not big enough, teachers are not there. So the question of size, when it comes to going up to 100 million people, which is something like, anywhere between 10 and 15 times the number of people that we already educate, we really are not equipped for it. So I feel that, ramping up our existing models, each one teach one, going to each one teach 10 is not going to work. We need to have slightly different paradigms and models. Like I said, the classrooms are not big enough. And as has been pointed out in some other scale, there are not enough trees. And why do you ask? There aren't enough trees to make books. If you want to really educate so many people, we cannot afford to pulp so many trees. It's not, the point is it is not just a question of scale. These have different dimensions. Infrastructure is one of them, and the environment and so on is one of them. There are other challenges as well, and I'll briefly address them because it's always a surprise to a Western audience when I say that the average per semester fees in my university is $100 per student. So it's not, these 100 million people are not going to be able to afford a Western education, however many one is willing to take. Most students simply cannot afford the fees in various parts of the higher education landscape. And we do need to have inclusive policies because, and in particular, we need enlightened affirmative action plans because I'll make the point again, but we need to increase the diversity of the student body as well as the general diversity of our campuses. When it comes to 100 million students, as a member of the Planning Commission has just said, it's a national imperative. There are skill developments. There's so much. I mean, it's a big problem. In fact, we believe that it's an international problem, which is why we talk about it so frequently and in international forums. One of the major initiatives in the last plan was the creation of the National Knowledge Network. It's a 4 gigabit internet connectivity for essentially every institution of higher learning. The previous Minister for Human Resource Development, Mr. Kapil Sibal, was very enamored of the community college model, where there was the sort of possibility of making the tertiary system at least in a two-tier scale. The need for vocational schools and polytechnics and ITIs, somehow that has come out as it is, but it was meant to be ITIs. These polytechnics, that is there, and as a member of the Planning Commission has already said, they are of dodgy quality. Partly because we don't know which market, which intellectual and service market we have to address. I believe that one of the ways out is using the internet and using technologies. So e-teaching is something that we are going to have to develop. And given the range of languages that we think in India, it's not enough to just have one teaching mode. We need to be able to communicate electronically and in the vernacular. So the need for developing our own indigenous tablets and devices has been very strong. What's pictured over there is it's called the Aakash Tablet. This was announced with great fanfare, and it hasn't quite lived up to that fanfare, but $35 US was supposed to give you one of these babies in your pocket. It takes a little more. Yeah, I'll take less. It costs a little more, but still, it's now come within the 2,000 to 3,000 rupees range. And this is one way to go, which will also save some amount of trees. An important point that is getting less important by the day, but many groups in India are not included fully in the higher education scenario. Women is one major group, depending on the subject that you look at. And furthermore, it's not, while there are a lot of women being educated, we've heard some numbers already, persistence is a problem. So women's participation in higher education decreases with time. Classes get to be more male as you go higher up. And furthermore, many of our campuses are not very inclusive, even for women. So I believe that this affects the type of work that gets done. Also because there's another group, or historically many socially disadvantaged groups have been excluded from any kind of education. And this is an illustration of a book by Kancha Ailaya, who's a thinker along these lines, who points out that participation of a diverse group of people brings different points of interest into discussion. So weaving was, weavers discovered how cotton is spun. Laundrymen discovered how, detergents are made, and so on and so forth. So the point is this, that innovations which are context-dependent happen when you include a lot of different groups. And there have to be different ways of bringing these different groups into the higher education fold, regardless of the kind of merit one might have earned through examinations themselves. Because we need local, frugal, and truly innovative ideas to solve the kinds of problems that we have. So the challenge before us, in some sense, is to make curriculums that are relevant, not just to us, and curriculums that need to be wanted in addition to being needed. Namely, if you open up a IT school or an engineering college in the state of Andhra Pradesh, you'll be flooded with applications. Whereas if you just make one for dealing with climate change or the environment or drinking water or what have you, you will find absolutely nobody going there. So we need to do we need to figure out how to do this. We need to make this accessible, and then I think the true advantage of the demographic dividend is that you'll have a lot of very diverse people coming in, bringing your ideas to address these kinds of societal problems. And I just thought I would throw this in because I do have to deal with this all the time, that inclusive policies are really very, very difficult to implement in a truly equitable manner. I'll just leave my conclusions over there. These are just resonances that I've found with a lot of the other talks that other people have given. Education, like all other problems, needs many models. I believe that there's a danger in homogenization, especially in aligning to a global model, which may not be completely suitable. I have a concern that we're losing diversity and indigenous knowledge and culture, and we need to combine sensitivity and sort of ensure access and participation. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ramaswamy. I'd now like to invite Binod Kadria, Professor of Economics and Education at Jawaharlal Nehru University, to the podium.
Thank you, Chairperson. I must thank Amitav and Alice for giving me this opportunity to speak before you. I have been attending all the sessions from day one. I was thinking how to connect these 4 different components: skills, knowledge, innovation, and demographic dividend. And I got my clue by attending the sessions here. I think there has been a lot of talk about one final component which connects all the four. That is about diaspora. I think diaspora connects both skills and knowledge, both innovations and the demographic dividend. I am reminded of the presentations, the speakers who have already spoken before me have mentioned about skills and knowledge and innovations and the demographic dividend. I am reminded of Peter Drucker, who in the 1960s he was a futurologist, and he made a projection that by the turn of the 20th century, the world labor force would be divided into two parts, mainly what he called knowledge workers and service workers. So this is a chart I'm providing here. If you look at the leftmost side and the rightmost side, you'll see the rightmost side, generic categories of knowledge workers and service workers. Service workers are at the bottom of the chart. Because of the time constraint, I'm not going to share all the slides with you. I'll run you through some of the slides, but this is how the structure of labor force in the world is likely to be, and that's what we are experiencing now at the turn of the century, after the turn of the century. The creators and innovators are the IT professionals. They are no longer, categorized as scientists or doctors or architects and so on. We also have future teachers as students, and then we have health managers like nurses. These are all part of the knowledge workers. They are generic categories. And then we have cooks and porters and masons and so on down the line as skills, vocational skills that Member Planning Commission had already spoken. This is the map that the Member Planning Commission has already mentioned, that by 2020, India would have a surplus of high-skilled workers, whereas the world would have a deficit. And this is the numbers, the dots that you see against in the number just before the numbers are actually minus signs. So that is the deficit. If you add them together, it would exactly match what India would be surplus with. You can see that Australia is 0.5 million deficit, and so India would be a supplier. This is demographic dividend. This is also have already been spoken about, that 62, 63, 64% of India's population would be in the working age young youth group, and that would continue till 2040, 2050. And that the dependency ratio would be going down, and after 2040 it would start rising again. When I talk of diaspora particularly to connect these issues, I try to look at the global picture. And if you look at the rightmost bottom figure, that is 191 million. That is a dated figure. Right now it is 210 million migrants who are not living in their countries, their home countries. They are the diaspora. They are the part of the diaspora, and part of the Indian diaspora is in this country. This is a diagram that was made by India's high-level committee on Indian diaspora around the turn of the century. You can see the regional distribution of that 20 million. Now that 20 million has swelled into 25 million. That includes both NRIs, and NRIs are non-resident Indians holding on to Indian citizenship, Indian passports, and the other half is the PIOs, persons of Indian origin, who have become citizens of the countries where they live. And one is a stock. We have just 25 million stock. The flow is what are the migrants are. Skill migration. When we think about skill migration, in 1960s onwards, the skill migration started. It is focused on United States, but there are other countries like Canada and UK, other European countries. Australia and New Zealand are prominent recipients of high-skill migrants from India, and high-skill migration, high-income countries like Singapore, Malaysia in Southeast Asia. There are data. I do not have time to go into the details of data, but I just want to share with you that I have started an annual publication called India Migration Report. The 2010-11, which is focused on Americas, has just been out by Cambridge University Press, New York, and it is available. We are working on Europe and Africa, that next volume, and the one after that would be Asia Pacific, where Australia would figure prominently. So we have these stock figures country-wise. We also have time series figures in terms of flows. We do not have time again to talk about it. Australia is at the top. You can see about 20,000 migrants come here every year from India. And their occupational profile tells us about what kind of skill distribution they have. The one in red are called professionals, but you have across the board, all kinds of skills that are included in the migration diaspora. These are some of the Australian figures that you can see where Australia ranks, in terms of Indian migrants. India-born population in Australia is 4th in rank. Skilled migration is number 1. And employer-sponsored are number 3, total skilled stream is number 3, and international students is number 2. Chinese is the first, number 2 is India. So, and then we are 10th largest visitors to this country. These are the various details that, again, I'm not going to elaborate upon because of shortage of time, but if we are interested, then we can certainly go into the details of these data, do more research, and find out what the trends are going to be. I'm going to skip these, the kind of temporary and permanent visas that are being pointed out and have been spoken about, and what are the kind of point system and employer-sponsored system innovation and investment programs and distinguished talent programs and so on. And what are the numbers, what are the projections in 2013 that are also given. Almost 2/3 of the highly skilled variety of migrants from all over the world, 2/3 are from India in Australia, which is a huge, huge number. I want to share this one particularly. The IITs have been mentioned in high-skilled migrants from India, brain drain particularly. If we look at the studies that have been undertaken for various IITs, then the component of the brain drain, you can see at the last column here, 25 to 30% of the IIT graduates have left India, and they are, settled in other countries. So 1 out of every 4 or 1 out of 3, and that is the numbers. But if you see in terms of the quality, then they are the best ones who are living. From All India Institute of Medical Sciences, it is 3 out of every 5. So the dimensions are actually mind-boggling. In 4% of the physicians, in Australia, 4% of them are from India. So these numbers are there, how many people are going from Australia to other countries, and how many students are coming from India to Australia. These figures are also available. I wonder whether there is a dynamic conflict of interest here. We have always been celebrating diaspora and diaspora's contribution to the motherland, to home country, in terms of remittances and so on. And we are also being told by the countries, by the host countries, that it is in your own interest that these people, they should not be settling down permanently here. They should be temporarily coming and then going back. That is the shift in policy, that migration should not be permanent, it should be temporary. What is at stake? What is hidden behind? That is, I wonder whether there is, one is of the age factor, the diaspora's demographic dividend, whether in the countries like Japan, you mentioned, the aging factor is taking place, 48 years of average age. How to neutralize that? One way is to have younger migrants, and that's what countries are looking at. The developed countries are looking at India, China, and so on, to bring in younger graduates. And particularly if we look at IT sector, the IT professionals are all from the younger generation. So that is one way of rotating them. If they're not allowed, not asked, they can stay here for 7 years or so on under H-1B visa or something like that. Then if they have a great deal of turnover, then their age cohort is going to remain younger, and that would neutralize this. So that is one of the, perhaps the interest, the stake that is there. If we look at nurses, then what is the wages that we need to see? Their wages are lower than the average, and that actually gives them tremendous advantage in terms of comparative advantage in terms of international trade, because wages go into the cost of production. And if the costs are lower of goods and commodities and services, then that gives a tremendous advantage. That is why they want younger people. They want people with lower wages, no perks, because if they are temporary, there would be no pensions as well. I'm going to conclude in 2 minutes. And then, of course, students. Why students? Students are future workers, and they are the future workers embodied with the latest technologies. You and I, we are outdated. We do not have the latest technologies embodied in us. It is the younger generation of students who are going through the latest curriculum. They are the embodiment of the latest technology. And that is why country after country are having what is called the education melas or education fairs in countries like India to recruit. They call it recruit, and I think, Chairperson, that is a Freudian slip, because it should have been called enrollment. They do not call it enrollment, they call it recruitment, because it's future workers that they are recruiting. So these are some of the issues which are actually pervasive in our higher education sector in terms of numbers, in terms of quality, and so on. Low quality of teaching is very. We have a shortage of teachers. Why? Our best teachers are all around the world. When IITs were being set up, Nehru had sent emissaries to other countries to bring back teachers to India. Are we going to do the same now? Or are we going to let our future teachers go away from India? That, I think, is the conflict of interest that we need to keep in mind. I want to leave you with this cartoon. This used to be very popular in the 80s, late 80s, in Hindustan Times, and it was used to be called a cartoon strip called Chandu. There always used to be 3 characters in this, and some of you would remember this cartoon strip. It is no more there. And it is always a tongue-in-cheek conversation, 2 women and a gentleman. So the lady in the check, she says, they say the brain drain from India to the US may be slowing down. This is 1989. And Chandu, who is wearing the turban, tongue-in-cheek, he says, maybe we are running out of brains. That has double meaning, but if there is low quality of education, we may actually be running out of brains. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kadria. Our next speaker is Fazal Rizvi from the Graduate School of Education at the University of Melbourne.
Thanks very much. I'm deeply honoured to have this opportunity to speak to such an august and eminent group of scholars, business people, and policymakers from both India and Australia. And I do want to thank my colleague and friend Amitabh Mathur for this invitation. I think he has put together a truly outstanding conference. I'm sure you'll agree. Now, what I want to say, I say with a little bit of dividends, because our Indian friends at this conference, of course, have much more intimate and detailed knowledge of recent developments in Indian higher education than I do. So the questions that I might raise might seem a little presumptuous and a little out of place. To the delegates, to these delegates, I cannot say very much that they don't already know about the challenges facing Indian higher education and the policy questions that they struggle with on almost a daily basis. Issues like curriculum, issues like technology, issues like governance, and so on. So what I thought I might do, as somebody who's an outsider, is to raise some questions from a global perspective. Now, what do I mean by global perspective? I do not use the term the phrase global perspective in some abstract fashion, trying to say something about the universal, about higher education. But rather, I want to say raise a number of questions that are empirically informed on the one hand and normative on the other hand. I want to say these questions really are questions about India's position within the emerging architecture, global higher education. That is, higher education is becoming increasingly globalized with a huge amount of traffic across national borders, not only of people, as Binod had been talking about, but also of ideas, of capital, and indeed of technologies and media. So the question becomes as to how is India positioned within this emerging architecture of higher education. Now, I'm not only talking about rankings and all those sort of things. I'm actually talking about how they relate to the rest of the world and how the rest of the world relates to Indian higher education. The other questions that I also want to use is how does Indian system of higher education interpreting and responding to the requirements of an increasingly globalized and knowledge-based economy? What kind of pedagogic and curriculum responses has India been thinking about in relation, for example, the new graduate attributes which might prepare students not only for work within India, but also as diaspora, as you pointed out. We also want to ask a question from a global perspective as to how India uses policy ideas and policy resources from outside India in order to inform its very ambitious programs of reform. In other words, how can it establish a global conversation about reforms in Indian higher education, and what might that conversation look like, and how we might utilize that conversation not only for the benefit of systems, institutions within India, but elsewhere as well. The other question relates to how do we learn from spaces of learning that are increasingly becoming virtual and transnational. That is, the learning resources and learning products, if you like, that are not located with any particular specific nation, but around the world. And finally, I think a global perspective invites us to ask the question of how systems of higher education might work across national boundary by developing various transnational networks, various alliances, various bilateral and multilateral relations. So the focus on relationality is a really important focus that is increasingly something that in systems of higher education are now considering. And yet the literature on this quite often has issues defined and debated largely in nation-centric way. Basically, people describe what the challenges are within that system, and other people decide the challenges within that system. And what we do not do enough is to say how there are issues that relate to each other and, in fact, forge each other's character and constitute a particular way of thinking about it. Now, as we know, in India, there has been growing interest in developing partnerships and relations with universities around the world. This interest reflects in part a globally converging discourse about the importance of collaboration in both teaching and research. Around the world, there has emerged a whole range of these arrangements of relationalities. Some of these links are motivated by commercial interest within an emerging global market in higher education, while others are driven by more traditional concerns of development aid, public diplomacy, and indeed the pedagogic objectives of intercultural and international understanding. I think an issue that we need to actually consider from a global perspective in relation to Indian higher education is what are the reasons that India has for engaging in global partnerships and global alliances and global relationalities of various kind? How might its take on collaboration be somewhat different given its specific needs and given its specific demographics and indeed organizational and academic histories? Now, of course, international links in Indian higher education are not new and stretch back to British colonial period between the 50s and 60s and 70s. These were defined largely by development. But what is now happening is that these relationships are developed in a much more complicated framework where commercial interest and other interest come together, but in ways that is not always clear. There are politicses that are masked, that are really that it's very crucial for us to bring out and debate openly for the fear that if we don't do it, then there are all kinds of suspicion that will make collaboration indeed very difficult, even if the language in which collaboration is articulated is relatively straightforward, and the concepts we use appear to have more or less meanings that are shared by each. I actually was taken by Ravi Bhatia's comment yesterday that a new collaborative model is required. But that collaborative model really needs to emerge as a result of an understanding of the benefits of collaboration for each side. And these may not necessarily be identical. One of the things in my own research that I have found on collaboration is that people quite often use identical concepts and yet mean something that is radically different. And as a result, the differences are hidden away in those memoranda of understandings that we are so prone to sign readily and yet not delve down into the semantic depths of the. Now, given these these difficulties that I'm alluding to, my own view is that it's not enough to actually focus on similarities and commonalities, about which we have said a great deal at this conference, how the traditions are similar, how the other interests are similar, and how there are synergies. My own view is that we should equally focus on our differences and try to find a language through which we respectfully and in mutually supportive way explore the nature of those differences, and then try to figure out a culture of collaboration in which differences are not simply masked and pushed under the carpet, but are explicitly explored so that we learn from each other about our differing traditions, academic as well as cultural. So the understanding that emerges of collaboration is not an understanding that is superficial and symbolic, but substantive and long-term. Thank you.
Our final speaker is C. Raj Kumar, Vice-Chancellor of OP Global University.
Thank you very much, Chair. As the last speaker of the penultimate session of the conference, most of the things have already been said, but it's great to be here. Thank you so much, Professor Amitabh Mattu, as well as the Chairman of Australia-India Institute, to have invited me. Let me just start with some degree of provocation on this issue. I think let me focus on, while there is skills, knowledge, innovation, and the demographic dividend, my reflections in the next 10 minutes will essentially focus on higher education and institution building. I think it is fair to say that we in India have destroyed many institutions. We have, over the years, developed huge capacities to, in many ways, destroy some of the well-established and well-run institutions. In fact, if you kind of look around and see the kind of glory of many of these established institutions, and over the years, there has been a very strong sense of deterioration in every aspect of what we would call institution building. So we have a big problem to tackle. And for those of you who are trying to understand the larger higher education situation, simple statistics will give you some perspectives. We have over 500 universities in the country, and as it was mentioned earlier, there are different types of regulatory frameworks which govern these universities. And then, of course, there are over 30,000 colleges on top of these universities. And under these universities, there are many colleges as well. And they are governed by the state government, they are governed by the central government, some of them governed by both. There are independent regulatory bodies. So the complexity of regulation indeed affects the entire governance model. But if I were to identify three major challenges which have in many ways undermined the ability of Indian institutions to grow, would be first, leadership. Second, accountability, and third, governance. And I'm not going to in detail talk about this, but I'll just give you some examples to illustrate why these become the central problems of administration of Indian universities. I come from a city called Chennai in India, and that's where I grew up, and there's a college by name Presidency College. I don't know how many of you know, but Presidency College in Chennai has the distinct honor of having 2 Nobel laureates, not one, 2 Nobel laureates. And 6 months back, I was there to give a talk, and I was in tears. And I was in tears because we have destroyed that college. And we can talk about why I say we have destroyed, but we can talk about number of examples across India. Both C.V. Raman and Chandrasekhar were from Presidency College. So the problem with regard to India is the question of our unimaginative ways to govern our institutions, and this significantly undermines the ability of Indian universities and higher education institutions to grow. Another example, in a recent presentation by the Union Human Resources Development Ministry to the Parliamentary Consultative Committee, and these statistics are very interesting, and I would like you to pay a little attention on this. 42 central universities are there, in which of the sanctioned faculty strength of 16,602, there are right now 6,542 vacancies. 6,542 vacancies in faculty out of 16,000 faculty members. In the 15 IITs, we have 1,600 faculty vacancies out of 5,000 sanctioned positions. In the 13 IIMs, we have 111 vacancies out of 638 sanctioned faculty. And we can go on. If these three examples are useful because these are some of the better institutions, well-governed institutions. We're talking of central universities, IITs, IIMs. And if you go down further, it's one of crisis and disaster across different institutions. And here, it is not a question of, it's a question of governance, and that's the problem which I would like to highlight more. Let me quickly come back to the current situation. I mean, frankly, it's simply extraordinary also to look at the paradigm or the sort of paradox of Indian higher education. At one level, we have colleges in India, and people will understand who are familiar with India, that we have colleges in India which have a cutoff of 100%. So imagine it essentially means that in your 12th standard or higher, secondary school, if you have not got anything less than 100% or maybe a plus distinction, you cannot even enter into this college, a college known as Sri Ram College of Commerce at the University of Delhi, where I studied. And now the question is, logically, what you would think is that this college must be so good in so many ways so that there is a certain degree of highest maintenance of academic standards because of its accessibility is restricted. But then if you go further down, those who don't get into Sri Ram College of Commerce end up going where? Maybe MIT, Brown, Harvard, Stanford, Oxford. So the paradoxical situation that Indian higher education faces is a question of deep introspection, because we have a big problem with regard to quality, quantity, accessibility, equity. We just cannot afford to handle one issue while neglecting the other. As far as the situation with regard to Indian universities are concerned, it is fair to say that over the years, we have seen significant deterioration in academic standards, research, scholarship, publications, and the ability of universities to contribute to knowledge. There are two important rankings which were released in months of September and October, the QS World University Rankings, as well as the Times Higher Education University Rankings. Unfortunately, not a single university from India figures as one of the university in the top 200 universities of the world. While academics can easily argue about the methodological suitability of these rankings, the variables that are used, and the ability to emphasize one aspect of university governance over the other in determining whether these rankings are fair. However, if you look at countries in Southeast Asia, and I'm not even going to compare the great universities of Australia and Europe and US and New Zealand as well as UK, but let's talk about Southeast Asia. You look at Japan, you look at Singapore, you look at Hong Kong, you look at Taipei, and of course mainland China, and even Malaysia. These have one of the universities and some of them more in those top 200. And the last decade has made these countries significantly invest obviously on faculty, but also to focus on the ability of faculty members to promote and contribute to research. The methodology adopted by most of these rankings look at least 60% of their assessment towards research. And of course, there is a certain component of teaching and internationalization and all of that. But 60% is a substantial percentage. That means that universities ought to be envisaged as knowledge-creating institutions. And somehow, there is a fair amount of disdain that continues to prevail in most of our universities for our inability to focus on research. I would also like to add that the big debates in India with regard to privatization of higher education, unfortunately, has not gone well. Early 90s saw the sort of, starting of private universities, and unlike the great private universities of the US, including Harvard, Stanford, Yale, and NYU, 4 of them being private universities and many more created through philanthropic initiatives, the Indian experience has not been great. Most of our private universities, unfortunately, are mediocre, commercial, profit-making, at times dubious endeavors, and the entire framework of knowledge creation and institution building as the central framework for nation building has not taken deep inroads into the Indian context. And this is why the Indian Prime Minister most recently remarked that our university system is in many parts in a state of despair. In almost half of the districts in the country, higher education enrollments are abysmally low. Almost 2/3 of our universities and 90% of our colleges are rated below average on quality parameters. I am concerned that in many states, university appointments, including that of vice-chancellors, have been politicized and have become subject to caste and communal considerations. There are complaints of favoritism and corruption, unquote, Dr. Manmohan Singh. So what do? Well, the answer definitely is not to make more laws, which we are trying to do right now. There are some 8 to 10 legislations which are pending in the parliament with regard to broadly regulating higher education. One of the things which we have seen is that I don't think we have explored this sufficiently. We really need to figure out the way by which we can attract far greater investment in higher education through philanthropists. Now, here again, there have been some very useful initiatives being taken, but unfortunately, I fear that we are going in the wrong direction. And one of the things which we are about to do, which I fear, and I hope we don't, is there is a thinking that is emerging within the Planning Commission and some members of the Planning Commission and probably beyond, and I know Dr. Jadhav has, I've discussed this with him, is that there is in the current 12th plan approach paper talks about for-profit universities and higher education institutions in the country. And I have discussed this before. I strongly believe that this is a retrograde step because a lot of effort that is currently being done at some levels to promote non-profit private higher education through philanthropic initiatives will be significantly undermined because we know that there have been a number of steps which have affected the ability of Indian higher education institutions to grow. They suffer from credibility and legitimacy challenges, and what we strongly believe ought to be the reasons why universities should exist and to be promoted will get undermined in that process. The for-profit model which the Planning Commission is promoting fundamentally undermines the way we understand universities. The critical aspect of non-profit is the fact that the additional income that is generated by the institution over and above the expenditure incurred for its running is retained and used for the purposes of development of this institution. This is typically used for research initiatives, scholarships, and fellowships, and this ability to deal with the non-profit framework will be undermined if we move in the direction of for-profit. I would also like to say that this aspect is very beautifully covered by one of the Harvard moral philosophers, Michael Sandel, in his book, What Money Can't Buy, The Moral Limits of Markets. And precisely the question of if you commodify every aspect of our life, including, say, education and health, what is essentially ends up happening is that some of the most fundamental things that we value will be undermined in that process. And that is why it's important for us to further promote for-profit, non-profit higher education. I would like to end by saying that the challenge of Indian higher education requires a lot more imaginativeness on the part of higher education administrators, but a lot more humility and grace to accept there are so many wonderful experiences that we need to draw from different parts of the world, including Australia. Thank you very much.
I think you'll all agree 5 fascinating perspectives on our session's topic from 5 very eminent and distinguished speakers. I'm sure you must all be very keen to ask some questions. We've got 10 minutes for questions. If people would like to state who they are and who they would like to respond to their question, that would be great. Here. We do have microphones, I think.
Hema Sharda from University of Western Australia. Thank you, Professor Mattu, for inviting such a diverse group of people, but this session is very close to my heart, skill, knowledge, innovation, and I want to touch on something that Professor Vinod has said about role of diaspora. For my Hindi-speaking audience, the role of Australian Indian diaspora is like dhobi ka gadha ghar ka na ghat ka. And that means if I'm an Indian Australian right now, and I go to India, I try to tell my Indian side how to do business with Australia, they think I'm too Australian. And when I try to tell my Australian counterparts that don't keep counting your Indian education win or loss in dollars and trade and marketing, they think I'm too Indian. So we are neither here nor there. And that's a big issue. That's why we can't contribute the way we want to contribute. Second thing, in my own role as a director of South Asia Relations and as a senior professor for the last 20 years, I have gone to India probably more often than many people in the university. And persistently, I have said one thing, that India does offer lot of opportunities for collaboration, and unless our relationship will be on equal footing with win-win situation for both sides, what happened 3 years ago will again happen, because our motivation is still compounded by how we can make money out of international students. We need to move away from that and start looking at how we can help India rise with the meritorious scholarships and opportunities. You know, till today, I have not been able to take one Australian friend professor for 3 months sabbatical to India, to even places like IITs, where there are examples of German, French, other professors staying for several months. And when I was growing up in IIT Delhi, where I have studied, there were Imperial College professors for one year staying there. So somewhere, I think we need to contribute the other way also, and that's how our relationship will be long-term, sustainable, and fruitful.
Thank you. Can we have a quick response? Does someone want to respond to that?
Well, I suppose that was a comment in Hindi with a proverb saying the washerman's donkey belongs neither to home nor to the banks of the river. But I suppose those times have gone. There used to be a time when the diaspora, particularly, used to be considered as deserters of the motherland. I'm reminded of Hargobind Khurana, for example, who won the Nobel Prize in medicine later on, but he did not get a job, an assistant professor's job in Chandigarh University. When do we celebrate them? We celebrate them when they make a mark on the global scene. So I think those times have gone. Now we celebrate the diaspora. We shake hands with them. We have the Indian Pravasi Divas in the first week of January. So all those times have changed now. And I would like to say the times of washermen have gone by. Now we are more dependent on DIY, do it yourself. We have the irons and the washing machines at home.
Professor Mattu.
Thank you very much. This is a great panel. I just want to really explore the whole idea of not-for-profit and profit universities further and get Dr. Jadhav's point of view. Because I think normatively, Professor Rajkumar, what you're saying is absolutely true, that in an ideal world, you would have charities and other institutions contributing for the good of society generally. But having seen how not-for-profit societies function in the higher education arena, and your university and a couple of others are exceptions, they manipulate the laws under which they are governed to make profits. And that's all over India. If you look at the engineering colleges, the colleges of management, B.Ed colleges. On the other hand, if you actually are able to create institutions under the Companies Act, you can and give legitimate incentives for making profit, I think that might work better in terms of, in a sector where you agree is completely overregulated, where the license permit Raj is really even now suffocating any new initiative. Similarly, now that the Foreign Education Service Providers Bill has really been thrown into the dustbin, but even there, who would invest, I think it was minimum of $10 million? You would have to give a bank guarantee of $10 million before you could even begin talking about investing in India. I mean, unless you provide incentives, I can't see how you can actually ensure that the demographic dividend remains a dividend. But I would want your and Dr. Jadhav's response.
Well, to start with, let me tell you, Amitabh, I don't know of a single for-profit university anywhere in the world which is good. You can, if anybody can educate me on that, that will be good. I don't know of a single university which is good, reputed. Secondly, I also think that if the purpose, we have a problem of quality and quantity. So even if we, let's say, assume that when we make it for profit, we will have a number of private players coming in, we will still run into the same problem of employability, because the education that is offered in most of these private universities or institutions is in many ways problematic. Third, which is much more fundamental, is that we need to also recognize that there are certain things which market cannot determine. We need to depend upon certain fundamental principles and values on the basis of which we want to structure our society. And I do think that higher education is an important area by which we cannot move in the for-profit direction, because the way we assess the working of corporations is not the way we assess universities. If we want to assess whether a corporation is functioning well, we can look at different quarter earnings and profits and their contribution. But how do we assess what kind of contributions universities are making? And how can that be assessed in the context of determining how one is making profit or not? That's the biggest problem in the for-profit, non-profit debate.
Jadhav?
Just to supplement, actually, Amitabh, you have already answered the question that was raised. But just to give you a quick perspective, today we have more than 600 universities, and we are hoping that in the next 10 years, the number of universities would be 1,500. And there are various ways in which we are going to approach that. The GER, the gross enrollment ratio, if we want to raise the GER from the current level to bring it to the world average level, that would require so much of investment. The total investment needed would be enormous, and there is just no way government alone will be able to do that. So there are various ways we are thinking about. One of them is, of course, the Foreign Education Providers Bill, which is stuck in the Parliament, and we don't know whether it will come through. There, of course, there is a condition about certain million. You said 10 million. Actually, the condition is 20 million. We don't know what the response would be. We don't even know the fate of that bill. But in the spirit of having more and more universities and world-class universities or the state-of-art universities, this is one of the ideas which is being talked about. And as Amitabh-ji, as you rightly said, today, although education is not for profit, there are various ways in which the manipulations take place and the profits are being made by the private universities. Only thing is that the government doesn't get any benefit out of that. So one of the idea, in the spirit of having much larger number of universities, we are contemplating this. This is an idea which has been put forth, and there are many ifs and buts to go with that idea. Nothing has been decided, but I can also tell you that there is a very large body which is making this demand that to legitimize the current practice which is going on and allow education for profit. So that is the approach that we have taken. But it is not a final decision. Just one more thing about the manipulation. It was also said earlier here that we don't need more laws. You will not believe that there are a number of proposals, bills, which are pending in the Parliament. One of them is prevention of malpractices in higher and technical education. You cannot believe that even today, while we have so many laws, today there is no law which can potentially prohibit malpractices in higher education and in technical education, and the malpractices abound. They're everywhere, and we have no law to control that. So there are certain laws which are indeed necessary, but that is also stuck in the Parliament.
30 seconds, Dr. Jadhav, and all of you really, it might be worth studying, and I know it's critiqued within Australia, but the corporate governance of public universities, where there's an incentive where your research grants or your total grants are dependent on how you perform. I know it's critiqued here, but it's
30-second response is this. There is a committee appointed under the chairmanship of Mr. Narayan Murthy, which is exactly going to aim at getting the corporate sector involved in the higher education. And that is currently underway.
Amitabh, can I just take some guidance from you? There's lots of questions.
There are questions.
And we're 3 minutes over. Can we take a few more questions or 5 more minutes?
There's a question from that side.
I'll take one up the back. Sorry, Suresh. The gentleman up there with the yellow tie on.
Yeah. Why don't we collect all the questions and then one quick round, 1 or 2 minutes?
I'll take that suggestion. I'll take 5 questions and I'll just get people to give a quick response. So the gentleman with the tie, your brief question, please.
Thanks for a terrific panel. Just 2 quick points. One, I do want to underscore a point Raj made. Apart from elements of the malpractices bill, if the legislation pending in Parliament actually passes, it will be counterproductive for higher education. the absolute disaster waiting to happen. NCHER bill, the current structure of the foreign providers bill. The second point I want to make, which we don't often discuss in this, we talk about politicians, we talk about political interference. The history of higher education in India is the history of the self-abdication of the academic community, of its role. Politicians stepped in that vacuum which we created, and I still don't see that energy amongst our community to become custodians of our own universities and our own fate. I mean, the entire higher education debate in India is about 20 people controlling the entire system. Let's be clear about it. When was the last time JNU University Teachers Association said, this is our plan to make JNU world-class 20 years from now? When was the last time Delhi University did that? And I think that is the critical element.
Sorry to cut you off, but I'm trying to give a few other people an opportunity. Rich, if we just keep it really brief, please.
Just I can speak up. Suresh Bhagat from RMIT. So I think what I heard is probably 80% on the problems, 20% on the solutions. I believe it should be the other way around in all the speeches and all those sort of things. Secondly, I heard that also what we want to do and what we do is a big gap in there too. And the policies and governance are, I think, either the people realize the problems, but we are handicapped throughout the 2 days. Even the politician seems to be handicapped, you are handicapped, and all those things. What we want to do, the laws are pending, these global things. The message, what is coming from India to out of the world and to all of us, is not very clear. So it's confusing as well. That confusion should be overcome if the partnerships, collaborations India is looking for. 60 million you want to, skills for the overseas, all those sort of things. Standards should be raised, the quality should be raised, and what we want to do, that gap must be fulfilled.
Thank you, Suresh. Gentleman over here.
I'm Sunny Chandra. I am ex-IIT Kanpur alumni, but here I am as a migration agent. I have 2 questions, no comments. Number 1, all you wonderful universities, what percentage of your revenue comes from your alumni association? Do you actually raise money? We in IIT Kanpur contribute more than twice what the government gives to IIT. We have created chairs, put in buildings. All those people who are members of parliament from IIT contribute their 25 crores, I think it is, to the IITs. So that's the first question. What is the percentage of your revenue from alumni, and what are you doing about it? The second question is, last year, Australia lost $2 billion in trade on education, from 18 billion down to 16 billion. 50% of that loss was from India. Australia lost $1 billion worth of trade on education and associated services from India. And I'm going to ask the State Government of Victoria, because you were the biggest losers in that, what you're doing about it later. But right now I want to ask the panel, what is your attitude to your bright students, encouraging them to come to Australia rather than the United States of America?
And there's a gentleman up the back there.
My name is Shravan. I'm sad to introduce myself that I was the student who got attacked here in 2009 with the screwdriver into my head.
Can't hear you. Speak up.
Yeah, I'm coming here since since the program has started. It's been a long time. It's just to say thanks to both the Indian and Australian governments on all the seniors' behalf, and I'm happy to help the relationships build stronger between both the countries in whatever the way I can do, because I'm capable to do anything now. Because of the attack happened on me, there are some limitations to my vision, so that's why I usually sit in a free area. I don't come into the crowds. And that's all. I would like to thanks once again to both the governments and organizations. Thanks.
The gentleman over here.
Thank you. Kishore Dapke, Monash University. If I may, I'll just ask a question. What is the effect of the entrance examinations on the quality and the viciousness of the competition in tertiary education in India?
Who'd like to start making a comment on that?
Why don't you give a minute or two to each one?
Okay, each person.
Okay. All right. Okay. Let me start with the. Sorry? One minute, right?
Yeah. Maybe you can
just
pick
one
and
minute.
choose questions.
Yes, I won't do all of that. On what we can do, what we're doing, I mean, frankly, for the last 10 years, you know, the fact the Australian university's imagination among Indian students is pretty marginal. The best of Indian students, maybe even the second best, or maybe even third, would rather go to a second-rate or a third-rate university in UK or USA and would not come to a University of Melbourne. Apologies for that, but the fact of the matter is, this is the reality. Now, there are a number of reasons for it, and many of us who know about the quality of Australian universities have promoted the fact that we should consider, Indian students should come to consider top Australian universities. But this was because of the fact that historically, at least when I was growing up, I saw a number of mediocre educational agents which had tied up with Australian universities and had these meetings in some five-star hotels in India and were simply recruiting students. This created a very strong negative impression about the quality of Australian universities, which is now changing significantly. The kind of engagements that is taking place now with Amitabh and Australian India Institute in India is the way to go. So I think we can see an upward trend on it. I think I'm done. Probably one more point which Professor Pratap Bhanu Mehta raised. Absolutely, Pratap. I think we need to take complete ownership. The entire debate relating to higher education is polarized because academics are not part of the conversation. But the only other thing I would add is we also have a very strong regulatory regime which affects the ability of academics to even engage in that conversation. So you have the sort of education ministries to departments of education in state governments to other forms of regulatory bodies. Frankly, for them, the education department is like irrigation or agriculture or whatever. And so they determine policies for all of that. And being academics what they are, there is a certain degree of timidity, and you may even call it humility, and at worst irresponsibility, which complicates the matter further.
I want to agree with what you've just said in relation to Pratap's comment. I think that's not only the case in India, it is also the case in Australia. The academic profession has largely abrogated its responsibility to be self-reflexive and to make itself, rather than allow managerialism to creep in to an extent that really has been very damaging in this country. And I think if that is the kind of thing that we continue to do, there'll be a huge amount of damage to continue. The second point that I want to make relates to the foreign institutions bill, which is now languishing or may not even ever come up. My own view is that that really derailed much more productive conversations that could have been had about the nature of relationships quite independently of the kind of institutions that might have come in and set up campuses. Campuses were never going to be any large numbers, even if any, indeed. So while we talked and debated and there was a great deal of heat about the Foreign Institutions Bill, we were not talking about the nature, scope, and the productivity of other kinds of relationships which are nevertheless possible with or without legislation.
Well, I think I'll address just two questions. One was about the contribution of the alumni associations to Indian universities. I think it's minimal. It's close to zero. It's not like the IIT model. Exactly. So the gentleman has left, so I will not elaborate on that.
He has abdicated his responsibility.
But there is a serious question here about the impact of entrance examinations, which, based on competitive entrance examinations. I think the worst example is the joint entrance examination for the IITs. The middle class is so aspiring to get the awards into the IITs that for about 600 and odd seats, there are 60,000 applications, and it's a neck-breaking. The impact is on two sides. One is on the parents themselves, and the other side is the students themselves, in the sense that they are even encouraged to neglect their school final examinations, and rather focus on the entrance examination at that level. And there is a huge coaching industry which prepares them for appearing in this. But I should also mention that there is a competitive examination model that JNU follows. In Jawaharlal Nehru University, it's a postgraduate university, of course, but there we have the 100 marks divided into various layers. Only 30% of the marks are given to the competitive examination, and the rest are divided into, and my friend here, Ram Ramaswamy, was mentioning, the equity principle is upheld in the sense that your socio-economic background is also taken into consideration. 10 points are given for that. If you are a girl child, then 10% is given for that, and so on. So the total adds up to 100 points. So it's a good mix of both competition and the background that the children have. This is important because, after all, you are faced with the challenge of screening. If the numbers are so huge and the seats are limited, you have to have some way out. Thank you.
Quick one second. No. Please don't.
Sorry, we haven't got any more time. Sorry.
Okay. In addition to the other points, when Pratap says that Indian academics have abrogated their responsibility, there is one very peculiar thing that has happened in our country more so than in others, and that is that there are two almost separate, completely separate streams for the Indian scholar. One is in the research institute and one is in the universities. And at least I have some experience of both of them from sciences as well as and having taught in a university. A lot of the better people tend to go to the smaller institutes where teaching is much less of an importance. So you have this very peculiar sort of dichotomy over here, that a lot of very smart people are in places where they actually impact very few students. Yes. And then you have this additional problem, therefore, that they cannot see what's, the ones who are the most articulate somehow speak for very few, and those who are speaking for many perhaps can't speak very much.
Very quickly, just 2 points to make. One is beginning with Pratap's point. Pratap said that it was a comment rather than a question that NCHR or other legislations which are pending, if they are passed, it would be a disaster. I disagree with that, but I agree with the fact that he pointed out that academics have abrogated their responsibility while working on NCHR, that is National Council for Higher Education Research. That's the most comprehensive amendment to the system that is possible. While working on that, the group that was working on that, I was part of that, we went all over the country and we had discussions with academics all over, and rarely, if ever, we got any positive feedback or concrete feedback from academics. So there is a point in what he is saying that academicians have abrogated their responsibility. That part I agree. The second point is that basically what has happened is that there are, of course, many problems with the Indian education system. There are central universities, state universities, deemed universities, and private universities. It's a four-fold classification like a caste system. In these, the mainstay of higher education is state universities. More than 80% students go to state universities. They are the ones which require major reforms. And I dare say, with my own experience, I handled one of the largest state universities, University of Pune, with 650,000 students. It is possible the leadership can make a difference, and it was possible for me to bring about a major change in a matter of 3 years, and that is something which needs to happen to more universities, state universities which are in a very, very bad state. So there are issues about access, there are serious problems about quality, serious problems about equity, and very serious problems about employability. While we have, for a very long time, in spite of all the lofty talks by our politicians, education has been ignored until recently. Way back in 1966, it was proposed that at 6% of our GDP should be spent on education. The public expenditure should be on education. After all these years, from 1966 to now, we never crossed 3.5% of GDP. with real seriousness, the education was addressed in the 11th five-year plan, and it is being addressed now. Very late, but we have finally started. There are major challenges involved. Right now, we are only at 4% of GDP. Spending more money is not necessarily solving the problem, but it's part of the solution, and that needs to be done. There is a whole set of big challenges involved. We did not grapple with the challenges earlier. We have started doing that in the last 5 years, and we are going to do in the next five-year plan, because it is fully with the realization that if we do not harness, if we do not put our education sector, skill development sector in order, there is no future. The future generations will never forgive us. So we are finally doing it, and I think we need to, we need best luck and best wishes of all of you.
I'm sure we could ask questions and talk about this all for the rest of the afternoon, but unfortunately we can't. So please join me in thanking our very eminent speakers. Thank you very much.